Hello, this is Linda Lysakowski, and today I'm here with Cathy Allen. And Cathy has a unique position. Her company is called the Board Doctor. And I have worked with many, many boards, as so has she. And I think we all agree that sometimes they need a doctor, maybe a miracle worker, but maybe she's that too. I don't know. We'll find out, I guess, as we talk.
Mm.
So tell us a little bit about your background, Cathy. How long have you been working with nonprofits?
So, in one form or fashion, it's nearly 40 years now. I was invited to join my first nonprofit board when I was 24 years old.
Uh,
And it's a story that I actually tell often when I'm working with board members about their roles and responsibilities and especially that responsibility to do fundraising. Because in my case, when I was 24, the board president and the executive director were very clear when they were recruiting me that fundraising was expected. It was part of my responsibility as a board member, and I exempted myself in my own head. I thought they can't possibly mean that they need me to help with fundraising. I don't know anybody. I don't have a fundraising list. I've never done this before. And so about 6 months in, when the executive director asked me how I'd like to fulfill that obligation, I was mortified. I was just shocked. But fortunately for me, this was an executive director who was invested in helping me learn, right? She could have just been mad that I was no help, but what she was instead was somebody who was willing to just teach me, bring me out of my comfort zone, give me tasks to do that I could do, stretch, learn, so that by the time I was, I'd been on that board for a few years, I was able to make an ask of a major donor, along with anybody. So it's something that I talk about a lot. My career at that time was largely working for elected officials, working in state government, but I became a first ever executive director of a nonprofit advocacy organization in Ohio in 1999. And then after that, set up a shingle and started consulting. So I've been consulting in the nonprofit space since 2003.
well, your path has probably crossed mine in one way or another because that's about how long I've been in this field. Also have served as board member, but I didn't start quite as young as you did because I was busy having babies at that
Uh-huh.
age.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Good for
so
you.
what made you decide to go into consulting and why did you choose to call your business the board doctor? I think that's kind of a fascinating title, and I think you have a stethoscope even on your website, if I'm not
I
mistaken.
do. I'm fond of my business name, and I have a lot of fun with it for sure. So I first went into consulting I under a different name. And for the first 12, 13 years that I was consulting, I had a different business name that had meaning for me, but did not have meaning for anyone else. And so in 2016, when I was leaving my native Ohio to move to Florida, I saw it as an opportunity to rebrand. And what I wanted was a business name that people would know what I do when they saw my business name. And, I suspected that anybody who'd ever served on a dysfunctional board or who was working for a dysfunctional board would know what I do. And that bore out very early on. I was at a Chamber of Commerce event in my new town in Florida, and somebody grabbed me by the hand and said, "Oh, you're the board doctor. You got to meet my friend Sue. She's got a horrible board," right? And so it just absolutely works. It sometimes works against me, right? If someone has reached out to me and we've designed a project together that they're going to take to the rest of the board to approve the budget for, to pay a fee to me, that sometimes the board members will say, we don't need a board doctor, you know, where I wouldn't have that problem if I was, Cathy Allen Consulting. But I have fun with my business name, right? I have a newsletter I call Nonprofit 911. And I have a self-assessment tool that I call the annual checkup, right? I mean, I just have fun with the business name, but I think people know what it means. And even healthy boards need doctors, right? Even a healthy board can get one notch better, the same way a world-class athlete can get one notch better. So it hasn't been a barrier that way.
That's very true. I think we all go to I think most of us go to our primary care physician I go every 3 months because he wants to
Mm-hmm.
keep an eye on some of my health issues, and we need doctors when we're healthy too, to
We
stay
do.
healthy.
We
And I
do
think
to
that's a
stay healthy and get one
good,
notch better. That's right.
good example with boards. Even the best board can sometimes use some outside help. So I think that's a
Mm-hmm.
really,
In fact,
really
the best boards do, right? The best boards do have an annual practice of having some presentation and some aspect of governance. The best boards do have some sort of regular self-assessment tool that they use annually in order to identify where they're strong or where they need to make changes. So it is something that works for healthy boards as well as boards that know they need an intervention.
yes, and I think most do. I know my career when I started was basically focused on the fundraising end. But what I
Hmm.
found was people would call me and say, "We need help. We need help fundraising." And when I really got into it, what they needed was help with their boards. So,
Hmm.
so I think to me, you had a unique approach to it as you started with the boards, which is kind of the root of it. But what do you think makes you different than other consultants?
Well, you're right. I did not start out as a fundraising consultant that added governance later. I did start out as a meeting facilitator and sort of gravitated to this question of governance just as a matter of interest. Um, I, I think what makes me different among consultants is that I am just determined to focus on the smallest of small nonprofits. You know, 70% of the nonprofits in our country, according to IRS data published by Candid, um, file that 990N, right? They have $50,000 a year or less in income, and most are a lot less than that. So those are organizations that don't have staff by and large. Um, and you wouldn't know that if you were just perusing the general thought leadership out there. If you Googled up responsibilities of a board or some aspect of nonprofit governance, so much of it is written for staff. Even stuff that's about boards is written about boards instead of for board members themselves.
Mhm.
And so I think what makes me different is that I never ever forget to be talking to board members who are trying to do it all without staff. They're not trying to define governance as our role that's different from our executive director and her team, but our role in governance as board members as distinct from all those other duties that we're also doing that you don't have to be a board member to do that other kinds of volunteers could do if we were organized that way. So it's a hard niche to earn a living in, frankly. It's a hard cohort of people to find. They can be in any profession, anywhere.
Mm.
So it's hard to target, and they're not likely to have time to be thinking deep thoughts about governance and how to organize our board and coming to class, right? They don't buy books, they don't fill up workshops necessarily. And so it's hard to serve this group of people, but I'm committed to it, and I keep doing that.
What made you decide to focus on the small nonprofits? Because it is a challenging market. I've run across some organizations like that that have no staff either, and it is really
Hmm.
a hard market to get into. But what made you decide to do it anyway?
I really I I enjoy the people, right? If someone cares enough about whatever their topic is, maybe they're the friend of the local library, right? And they care enough about that to form a group, to keep it going, to do all of the things that need to be done. That's just a group of people that I enjoy hanging around with, right? So if it's the Downtown Business Association or it's the high school music boosters, right? Or the Friends of the Local Park. They're people who just care about that thing, and they care enough to figure out how to create an organization, how to run an organization, how to raise enough money to do the thing that they're focused on. And I like to help them, get organized so that they can do it effectively and, with confidence, right? The people who call me think there's something wrong, but, they want to be clear before they go to their colleagues on the board and say, we should do this or we should do that, that they've had some guidance from somebody who really knows nonprofits. So, it's a difficult to serve market, but it's also an underserved market.
I can imagine it is because probably most of them don't have a great deal of funds like some of the bigger ones
Right.
have. But what do you think really distinguishes those small nonprofits from most larger ones? Like what are their needs? Their needs for governance, I would think, as you mentioned it, they're governing, but they're also doing all the work too. So
Mhm.
I
Yeah, they
think that's
are.
probably hard.
So, but the IRS doesn't recognize special rules, right? Oh, you're a small group, so you don't have to follow these laws or rules. That's not the case. Governance is governance, whether you're, a $10,000 organization or a $10 million organization. I mean, I think that what really distinguishes the small groups is this business of staff, right? And whether or not the programs and the operations are being delegated to someone else. And that allows board members to focus on the governance, the big picture, the strategic planning, the making fiduciary, decisions using financial data, right? Those kinds of things. So when you're doing it all, right, you're not necessarily thinking about, well, what is governance and what is a different role, right? And so it just requires a different sort of approach to those board members to help them organize their work, than if saying, well, that's something that you should be delegating to staff, right? I don't talk to people about that's not your lane, that's the staff's lane, right? I'm talking about that, you have to do this governance piece. And as a volunteer, you can also do this other piece, or you could recruit other volunteers, right, to do this piece. Um, I not terribly long ago was doing interviews with members of a board of directors prior to some strategic planning, and there were 11 members of the board, and 4 of them told me in the interview, "Ma'am, I don't really want to be on this board."
Oh, no.
Right? I just want to run this program, or I just want to do the social media and do the newsletter.
Mhm.
And so when we started working with them and saying, listen, you don't have to be on the board to be the person who does the newsletter for the organization. Come to find out, in this particular organization, they'd written bylaws that said to take on any big project like that, you had to be on the board, right? So we separated that out and recruited people to the board who wanted to do board work, to do governance work, and we let those other volunteers then leave, in an orderly fashion so that the organization wasn't hamstrung, but so that they were able to continue doing the work that they wanted to do. I just want to lead Saturday morning bird tours. I don't want to, serve on a board. One fellow told me one time, ma'am, I didn't, retire after 30 years working in corporate America to come here and look at spreadsheets in a boardroom. I just want to help the turtles. Okay, well, then you can be a program volunteer, right? But in a boardroom, we need people looking at spreadsheets and making financial decisions. So,
I don't know, in your experience, if you've ever seen it work where a board member can successfully separate. I know I had a client once, it was a small library. You mentioned libraries,
mhm.
and all board members, no staff. And when they were doing a capital campaign, and I said, look, somebody is going to have to manage this campaign, do the data entry. I was pretty much doing a lot of what mostly staff would be doing. But I said, you need to have somebody. And one of the board members stepped up and it worked just fine. In her case, she committed to doing that just for the duration of the campaign and to follow up
Mhm.
with pledge reminders and things. But I think that's very rare. I don't know. What do you think? Have you seen it work where some board members can step into those what would be normally staff roles and still have it work?
Right. So for most of the organizations I work with, yes, that is working until the time that that person decides they want to transition out. Right? When I get a call from somebody who says, I'm the board president, I've been the board president for 17 years, and I want to spend more time with my grandchildren now, and nobody wants this job. Nobody will agree to be board president. Well, when you get in there, you'll find that she's also managing the database, taking care of the financials, doing 4 or 5 jobs. And so we have to break that apart and find other volunteers to do that. Make sure that the board president's job is defined as a board president's job so that somebody will volunteer to do that job. So, yes, there are heroic people out there that take on the whole organization, and keep it all going by force of will and interest and because they've got available time and passion for doing that, and apparently some source of income, right? So that they don't also have to be working. But that'll only work as long as that person wants to do that. And so I'm always encouraging boards, make sure you know what is governance that you cannot delegate to others, and what is programs and operations that you can delegate to others, and recruit people just to do that. Allow people who aren't on the board to serve on your committees. It's a way to get to know whether or not people have the skills or the interest in serving on the board, right? Getting to know folk. But figure out a way to manage other people who are also involved in the organization, who don't necessarily want to serve on the board, but who do want to be involved.
Do you find in that case that I know I'm thinking of an organization that I'm familiar with, that the same person has been president of the board for, I believe, 20 some years. And it's like founder syndrome. I mean, and she does everything, so nobody has an opportunity to volunteer.
Right.
Do you find that prevalent in these smaller boards?
Yes, I do. Sometimes it does work, right? I'm working with a group now where the president's been there for 10 years, and he is a great guy. He is on top of everything. He's very responsive, and he's doing a wonderful job as president. There isn't an issue, except that the organization can become identified with that one individual. If anything were to happen to him, there would be a problem, right? And in his particular case, it isn't that he is given off signals that he's going to do it his way anyway. But I often find that, and I can put myself in this category. That's the kind of board president that I was, right? It was difficult to help me when I was a board president just starting out. I had things under control. I'd been thinking about it. And anybody who offered to do it or did it somewhat differently would get a politely worded message from me that they were wrong. Right. And so we find that often, right? Someone they're just capable, and it's hard to tell them, hey, we're trying to help you. It's just easier to serve on a board like that if somebody's just handling everything until that person decides to step back.
Yeah, for sure. And I don't know what we do about those kind of things, but I think, to me, it seems like, having term limits helps that to some degree. But some people resist that too, and I think it's really a challenge. But I guess, trying to get people involved in various aspects, as you mentioned earlier, like maybe one person does the newsletter, somebody else does the website, somebody else does the financial stuff. So it's not all falling on that board chair.
Yeah.
What are some of
Yeah,
the?
I just wrote an article about term limits, by the
Oh,
way,
did you? Oh,
and a newsletter article about it, and it got more engagement than other things do. You wouldn't find a consultant anywhere who isn't 100% in favor of term limits in every situation always, right? But you do often hear pushback on that idea that we're gonna, set aside people who are perfectly involved and perfectly good board members and lose all that institutional memory, and we can't find other people to replace them anyway. And I just again, I don't always convince my client organizations to put term limits in their bylaws or to implement the term limits that are already in their bylaws.
Right. The implementation is probably the hard part.
But I do always try to do that. I do always encourage them to do that for the health of the organization. If someone is serving effectively and well as board president, that's great. But for the health of the organization, for its longevity, having a cycle of new people, new fresh ideas in, so that organization never becomes only what that one person can achieve, but truly is co-created by a number of different individuals. That board president can serve in many other roles. And if he really wants to come back on the board, or she really wants to come back on the board, after serving some time away, then fine, come on and start a fresh new term. But often the pushback is we don't know how to find people, and of course, it's there's strategies for that too, right?
Right. That's what
It's
I think
something
they
that you can
really,
study and learn, just
really
like
need.
fundraising.
Yeah. It's been, I'm thinking of some of the boards I've worked with as you're talking, and I can just put people into those slots that I know
Hmm.
of, they just, so, but, and without being morbid, I sometimes have had to say to somebody, well, you're not going to live forever. And don't you want this organization to exist after you're gone? Because
Hmm.
especially founders, they want their organization to exist, but and we all
Hmm.
have to face our mortality, I guess, at
Hmm.
some point in time.
Hmm. Yeah.
But what are some of the trends that you're seeing now in boards?
So, so this has been a rough year in the nonprofit sector. There have been attacks coming not just on, our status as nonprofits, or our funding sources, but, on missions, right? There's increased need out there and fewer resources, across many different issue areas. And so it's a difficult time to be in there, doing good work in the community. Um, which has always been under-resourced anyway. But I am seeing also the resilience also as a trend. And big national organizations like Independent Sector and National Council for Nonprofits are really stepping up to take the lead, to be in there, fighting on behalf of nonprofit organizations, and trying to get funders to fund capacity building and operations, right? Funding for operations is always difficult with large funders who, want to fund programs but not staff. So they're really stepping up. And I'll also shout out Candid, right? Because they have, in the last year, been giving a legitimate, visible effort at serving the smallest of small nonprofits. You see it in their social, you see it in their offerings, online, or the articles that they publish, the research that they've done. They published some research last year on what makes small nonprofits different. So, we are seeing that as well. More investment in the small organizations.
That's good to hear. And
Hmm.
we'll, of course, give our viewers some links to your website, and so how they can sign up for your newsletters. And also maybe we can give them the link to Candid, since you've mentioned that. I don't mind
Yeah.
promoting somebody that's doing good for the nonprofit sector at all. So we'll,
Another trend that I'll mention is, small nonprofit, those volunteer board members, if they go looking for help, are much more likely to look within their issue area, right? So if they're a Friends of the Library, they're going to go looking for an association of library friends groups, right? Or association of parks groups, or whatever, more so than a generic nonprofit resource center, or the National Council of Nonprofits, or its statewide affiliate. And we are seeing, I think, associations working harder to make sure that their small nonprofit members, that they are addressing those board members and addressing their needs. The associations have the same problem as anybody. If you throw a conference, who's going to show up is staff of larger organizations. And
uh,
getting those, smaller organizations to send their board members to conference is always difficult. But they are reaching out in new ways and really trying to help do capacity building with their nonprofit members.
oh, that's great. Yeah, that's good to
Mhm.
hear. But tell us a little bit more about the services that you do offer. Like, do you do training? Do you help them write bylaws and
Mhm.
so what kind of things do you offer?
Yeah, so I do a number of things. I facilitate a board self-assessment process, right? Where we take the board through a master checklist of all of the things that a nonprofit board can or should do, and to identify where they're weak and then strategize for getting better. I run an online community for leaders of small nonprofits I call Nonprofit Vitality,
Oh,
right? I mean, I'm convinced that the volunteer board members of small nonprofits don't need big planning contracts with a consultant as much as they need learning and information in smaller chunks. So is it possible to hire me to give your bylaws a once over and, give you how I would amend them for governance purposes? Yes, I'll always disclaim that I am not an attorney, but I will look at for ease of being in compliance with them, right? Are they clean? Are they clear? Do they contain all the provisions that you need to have? Yes. Can I help with all of your other policies, your conflict of interest policy, your board member position description, your committee description, right? Help you right size your committees? Yes, I can do all of those kinds of things as well.
great. Sounds like you really are the go-to person for these small nonprofits that are. Do you work with any that do have a staff?
I do,
I
sure.
think probably
The thing is that even $5 million organizations sometimes think of themselves as small.
that's true.
So they're not put out at all by me saying publicly that I focus on small groups. And I'm happy to help those executive directors that have a board that's either become disengaged. That's the number one question I get. What can I do about my disengaged board?
Mm,
Or has become micromanaging, or
mm.
for whatever reason, there's other
Uh,
issues. I'm happy to go work with a board that has staff.
I think you really hit a major audience there is the people who micromanage, and some boards don't understand the difference between governance and management.
Correct.
And if you have staff to do the managing, let them manage. You do the governance. So,
And we tell staff, if you've got a board to do governance, let them do governance, right?
right.
If the executive director is the one writing the meeting agenda, guess what the meeting agenda is going to be about?
Oh, I've been to
Right? If
board
we're
meetings
holding them by
where,
the hand and we do the minutes and we do the financials and we make the copies of the packet and three-hole punch it and leave it at their, and we do all of that for them, then we've just created a lazy board and they will work on whatever it is we put in front of them. So if we have an hour-long board meeting and 45 minutes of it is a staff presentation, and then we're going to also adopt the budget. Well, then you're not going to get a fulsome discussion in that boardroom about our budget. Are we funding our priorities, right? And that's what you want a board for.
exactly.
So,
I had a client once where the executive director led the board meeting, made all the reports,
mhm,
and I thought, so why do we have a board here?
right,
And I think they
right.
thought, why are we here too?
Yeah.
They're
And
always,
there are many people out there who will say the system is broken, that boards are more difficult than they bring value, because I as executive director have to spend so much time preparing for the board meeting, and all the reports and all the stuff that we do is just such a suck of our time that we can't do our jobs too. And my response to that is lean in, lean in on governance, lean in on what governance is and what this board can do and be at its highest and best use. And there's, every consultant out there, I bet you've got horror stories like I do of times when boards were asleep at the switch and an organization and an executive director did get in big trouble
Mhm.
because they just got rubber stamped through.
Yeah.
So finding bad ideas got rubber stamped. So just let when it works, when the board is doing governance and they're delegating management and programs to an organization, to the executive director, that can be very, very powerful.
It can be very dangerous. So to not let the board do the board work and
Right.
have, the staff doing everything that the board should be doing. In fact, that
Mhm.
the executive director that I mentioned ended up embezzling money from the organization and the board was totally unaware.
Yeah.
So I don't know how it finally came out in the end. I think it might have been the CFO or something that
Yeah.
figured it out, but it was
That is
control
rough
breach.
duty on a volunteer board member, by the way, to have to
Right.
put together those legal documents, to be interviewed by lawyers, to have to go into court and testify,
Mm.
deal with the insurance stuff, deal with the fallout of something like that happening, and then now you got to go through an executive director search to bring somebody in. Um, that's rough duty. So much easier to learn something about governance and put your systems in place that would have made that impossible in the first place.
Well, I think if one thing that people take away from this interview, only one word, it's governance, right? I think we've talked a lot about governance.
I have.
Kind of switch gears a little bit and talk a little bit about the personal side, if you don't mind. I know that you're a caregiver for your brother who has Down syndrome and
Yeah.
is in the early stages of dementia, and I've been there with being a caregiver for my husband and having a son with developmental disabilities also. But how does that impact the work that you do? I know it made a change in my life, and I think for the better.
Yeah. And I bet we could have a whole, podcast just about this. So first of all, I'm intensely grateful to be self-employed. I don't know how somebody who has a job to report to every day
Mhm.
could possibly do what I'm called upon to do,
I'm
on
sure
a
they
daily
could.
basis. I just don't. And so I see how that happens. So I'm very, very grateful. But it has become more and more difficult for me to take out of town projects, to travel and go do somebody's retreat or whatever. And I have even setting up meetings during the day. I've had times when I've had to, tell somebody at the last minute, I'm so sorry, but my brother's provider didn't show up today and I can't make it to the meeting today, right? So fortunately for me, most folk in the nonprofit sector are quite understanding of that. But I've definitely needed over the course of the last year, especially to reorganize how I deliver services. So this online community is a place where people can go and ask a question and I can address it right there and then. I do have current clients that I'm able to provide ongoing support to them within the community context. I've posted a course, posted an online resource, and I can do my part either when my brother's asleep or in the early morning or other times that are not, dependent on being at my desk at a specific hour or being out of the house with clients. So I'd be interested to know how you did it as well. We can talk about that anytime.
Well, yeah, I guess I also did what you did as far as travel. I mean, I have traveled all over the world from,
Mm.
I've had clients in Mexico, Canada, Egypt.
Oh, wow.
And and I loved it when I was able to do it, but after my husband got sick, I really had a hard time leaving town.
Mhm.
Occasionally I would go, I was living in Las Vegas then, and I could fly to Reno and it'd be back in the same day, but I also did what you did, tried to focus more on my online courses. I developed 18 online courses, including some for boards. That
Hmm.
if you have some
I've
boards,
seen
you want
those.
to refer to those courses. But I actually have one for board members and one for explaining the difference between governance and management, because some boards don't know that.
Right.
Um, but I did pretty much what you did, really tried to focus
Hmm.
on things that I could do online and thank God for Zoom. I don't know what we do without it.
Right.
Zoom has been my kind of my salvation, but uh, but I also started focusing on writing. That's one of the things that I did, and we have to get you to write a book now because I don't think I have done that yet, but I bet you could easily write one. So,
If I collected up the stuff that I've written over the years and published either as a blog when I had one, or in recent years it's a LinkedIn newsletter or LinkedIn
well,
articles, right? People can follow me on LinkedIn and find all that stuff, and there's whether it's about hiring your first executive director or term limits, or I've got one coming up next week on how to organize your committees. Right. So, if I were to collect up what I've got, it might be a fair volume on, how to run a small nonprofit board.
well. if you need help with that book, let me know because I'd love to work with you in that. It sounds
Oh, that'd
really
be great.
exciting. So if people are interested in, having you come in and consult with them,
Mhm.
they can contact you through your website the best way? Or I'm interested in the online community. Is there a monthly charge for that? And then people have access to everything you publish?
Yes. So the online community is free for clients that I have a contract with or who like hire me for the board self-assessment.
Mhm.
But a membership is $35 a month
Oh,
or, $100 for a quarter. And we have, live opportunities, right? Like live Q&As when I'm there to just answer questions. There's a member forum, there's a course, there's, resource library based on the categories in the board self-assessment tool. So, I'm easy to find on LinkedIn, right? Either under my name, Cathy Allen, or the board doctor, right? And on my on my website, theboarddoctor.org, people can find a tab that describes nonprofit vitality, more information, and then we'll link people to it if they're interested.
great. Well, I certainly want to look up this myself because I think it's a fascinating thing, and I could certainly turn some of my clients that are really too small to, you know, go out and hire a major fundraising firm or governance firm. I think what
Hmm.
you're doing is really a credit to you, but it's also a big asset to those non small nonprofits that really
Hmm.
usually don't want to get involved in too much training for their board because they'll wear them out. But what you do is sounds like it's really a great thing for these small associations and groups like that. That it sounds really fascinating.
I'm
Um,
often told, I mean, when somebody does ask me to come make a presentation to their board, could be virtual, it could be in person. I've been told on a number of occasions, we picked you because we thought that our board members could relate to you, that I'm
uh,
relatable, which I think is another word for a little bit frumpy. I'm not wearing a suit. And I do shy away from the word consultant, as a matter of fact.
uh,
But I think that's true. Right, I can relate to those board members who are, they're in a small town. There's, the downtown is hurting, and so they form a downtown business association to try to run some events and drive traffic downtown. Uh,
right.
I think, people like that, just a few hours with them to help them get a little bit of a reset with their nonprofit board can really make a big difference. So I'm glad to do it.
I think that relatable is way more important than we realize it is sometimes. I,
Mhm.
I was laughing when you were saying that because I once had a client in rural northern Nevada, which was basically gold mines and cattle. That was their business. That was about all that was there, cattle, more cattle than people probably. And they hired me to do a capital campaign for them. And he said, we interviewed some other clients that came in here, obviously dressed real flashy and very sophisticated. And he said, they didn't understand rural Nevada at all, but you seem to. And I've spent a lot of time traveling in rural Nevada, so I did understand. And
Absolutely.
and sometimes that relatable thing, the chemistry really does mean a lot to people. So
It
is there
does.
anything else that you want to say before we end? It's been fascinating.
Well, I've enjoyed this. I enjoy talking about nonprofits and small nonprofits and governance any chance I get. So, thank you for the opportunity to do that. If there are other consultants out there, I guess I want to challenge you a little bit to look at what you're putting out. Is it for board members or is it about board members
Mhm.
for staff, right? If we can make sure that we're talking to those board members about how to organize their roles, how to do the job that they've agreed to do and do it well, right? To recognize their inherent motivation to do a good job, that they're not just there to be a reflection of the staff or for any reason other than to do their job well. If we're addressing those board members that way, from a place of respect, that'll help all organizations, no matter what size.
Okay, well, I want to thank you. This has been really great, Cathy. I'm so glad that we connected, and I'm sure our viewers, there's going to be a lot of people that can use your services. So we'll be giving you all the links and everything else that
Thank you.
to get
That's wonderful.
through to Cathy, and but maybe we'll have you back on again another time, sometime in the future when you have your book ready.
That'll be my nudge. Thank you.
Okay, well, thanks again for being a guest on our show. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.